you guys can understand me with my mask on, right?
Yes, ma'am.
For reference. Whenever you're ready.
Yeah. All right. Well, hi guys. Good morning. I'm sorry that we're missing a few, but hopefully they will get to see this. So George asked me to have a talk with you guys about estate planning, right? And I don't want you to get, I know it's a morbid conversation, but it's a necessary conversation. All right. So I'm gonna try to explain the basics to you, so at least you can get an understanding of the importance of it, and you will hopefully walk away from this understanding that everyone needs estate planning, right? So just a little bit about me and what I do and my why. I am Shalini Codispoti. I'm an estate planning attorney here in Houston. I've been a licensed attorney for the past 15 years. And I became an estate planning attorney after I handled a case where a young family, they had a 2-year-old daughter, and they were driving out of town, and the 2-year-old daughter was in her car seat in the back, and they were hit by an 18-wheeler. This was a young family. As I said, they didn't think that they needed estate planning, because a lot of people think that, estate planning is for old people, right? And unfortunately, both parents passed away. What ensued was a long court battle over who should care for the little girl. And the court battle was because both sides of the family, dad's family and mom's family, believed that they would do the best thing for their daughter. And so sometimes conflict arises even when we think that it wouldn't, and it comes out of a place of love. Right? Everyone thinks that they know what's best for this 2-year-old girl. She's just lost her both parents. So there was a huge court battle over that. And that could have all been avoided had the parents put some documentation in place as to who would care for their daughter if something happened to both of them. Okay? So that brought it full circle for me, and then I became a mom. And so I have 2 young kids myself. I have an 11-year-old and a 3-year-old. And that brought an awareness that estate planning is really something we do for those we love, right? So I have a saying that estate planning is the greatest act of love. All right? So a lot of people think that, okay, I'll get around to it, procrastination. Number one thing that we put in place because we think that we don't need it right now, that's something we can deal with later, right? We're running a business, we are working every day, we're trying to accumulate wealth. We're trying to accumulate assets, so we think that we need to put this on the back burner, right? But this is something that we should do now so that we can have peace of mind and we can really live life to the fullest, right? Knowing that we have done what we can to take care of things. So what is estate planning? It's a lot of legal jargon, right? And we think of estate meaning lots and lots of money, but that is not what it is at all. Estate planning is really a proactive plan that you put in place. It's a plan for life, right? Think of it as a roadmap. So you plan out a roadmap and you say, if something should happen to me and I become incapacitated, meaning I can't make decisions for myself any longer, and if something happens to me and I pass, what would happen to my loved ones? What would happen to my assets? So an estate plan is really a roadmap that you give to your loved ones as to how things should be handled. Okay? So I want to ask you guys, how many of you married? Have kids? Nobody has kids here? I know that George does, and I know that Tony does. And it doesn't matter how old your kids are, right? They're still your kids, right? So the reason I asked that is, how many of you currently have an estate plan? Whatever it may look like. It could be a couple documents in place, it could be something you did online, it could be anything. Anybody have any documents in place?
We just had it at our house goes to my sister-in-law.
How do you have that set up?
Through our health insurance, through our insurance, through our life insurance, agent, I'm sorry. Someone help me.
Okay, so you have your insurance set up that way.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. So
I mean, I've had one when I was in the Marine Corps. They made us do one
Yes.
for all of our stuff. So I've kind of been through this once before, but now that I'm out, that plan's long and gone.
yeah, yep. So an estate plan, I'm glad that you brought up that topic. It's not something that you do once and forget about it, right? Because as we know, laws change and circumstances change, right? So a lot of people come to me and say, oh, I did a will, I'm good. I did a will 10 years ago, so I'm good. I'm like, okay, well, what's happened since then? Oh, well, I've had 3 kids. Well, that's a significant change in your circumstances, and you may want to update that. Or I've had a divorce, right? And that's another significant change that you may want to update your documents, okay? So why do people not have an estate plan? Because you're too busy, you're too young, that's for old people, right? And it's probably too expensive. I'm not spending my money on that, right? Is that something that you've all thought about, like, yeah, this is probably one of my excuses for not having an estate plan? No?
I mean, just thought about it.
That's a good answer. All right, so this does not apply to you because none of you have an estate plan, right? And we'll talk about the beneficiary designations because that's what you have.
Okay.
So we'll talk about that today as well. So here's the thing, estate planning, right, is really for your family. It's for your comfort because estate planning brings peace of mind. It's really for your business, right? If you own a business, so for Tony and for George, what happens to your business if something happens to you, right? You want your continuation of your business. This is your legacy. Hexagon Plumbing is your legacy, right? And you want basically total assurance that if something happens to you and you become incapacitated or pass, that everything's taken care of. So I want to pause here for a minute and tell you a little story. When I say incapacitation, what do I mean? Does anybody know what I mean when I say incapacitation?
Not able to make your own decisions.
Right? And how could someone get incapacitated?
Coma.
Right? You can get into a car accident and, be on a ventilator. You can get COVID and be on a ventilator in the hospital, right? You can get Alzheimer's, right? Early onset Alzheimer's, right? Those are all things that we determine in law that's, your incapacitation. You cannot make decisions for yourself. So the important thing I'm saying here is that it is important that you make the decisions about what should happen to you now while you can, right? So let's talk about end of life decisions. And I'm telling you this story from my own family. I had an aunt who, she suffered with an autoimmune disease for many, many years, for like 20-something years. She was 30-something and she was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease similar to lupus, but for me a lot worse. She would break out all over her body in sores. She lived on steroids, right? So she was basically just swollen from 20-something years of steroids. Her immune system was extremely compromised. She got the flu, and she was eventually hospitalized, turned into pneumonia, and she had to be ventilated. I have 2 cousins, 2 younger girl cousins, and the doctors told my cousins, hey, your mom doesn't look good. Her body has been through so much in the past 20-something years, it's unlikely that she's going to come out of this. My cousins, obviously that's their mom. They wanted to fight and fight and fight and fight and fight. And basically just left her on the ventilator. It caused a huge rift in my family. My family is an otherwise very, very close-knit family. But my mom, who is my aunt's sibling, and the other siblings, were telling my cousins, hey, just let mom go, let her die as peacefully as possible. She would not have wanted to remain like this. She stayed on that ventilator for 4.5 months because my cousins could not bear the thought of pulling that cord, right? Which is understandable, right? That is a huge burden to leave for anyone to have to make that decision for you, right? And because she didn't have any documents in place, that's what ended up happening. So what was left was a prolonged period of grief and a huge medical bill. that we're all, having to pay, and my cousins had to pay all of that, right? Hundreds of thousands of dollars I'm talking about. And that could have easily been avoided had she put some documents in place, right? So that is kind of the kind of stories that we hear coming, out of not making these decisions for yourself, right? Do you want to be kept on a ventilator? What if you were diagnosed with a terminal illness? What do you want to happen to your person, right? What kind of nutrition would you want, right? There are people who are vegan and they don't necessarily want the nutrition that they get through the IVs, right? They may have a specific type of nutrition they want to get. These are decisions that you can make before something happens, okay? Any questions so far? By the way, this is open discussion. Stop me anytime and ask anything, okay? All right, so some common misconceptions about, yes?
I got a question. So once you put all this on paper, how hard is it for another family member to break it or take it to court and try to get a judge to overturn?
Well, how is a judge going to overturn a decision that you've made about your own body?
Just asking the question.
Yeah, no, they can't, and that's what I'm telling you. So, a decision that you make for yourself, they can't overturn. What is usually something that people kind of contest would be a will, if something like that. People usually fight over a guardianship when it involves money. That's when people start fighting, right? So they fight over a will. They fight probably over a trust if it's not drafted well, and they may fight over guardianship of a person. Have you all ever seen the movie on Netflix called I Care a Lot?
Yes, it's actually a really good movie.
Yes.
It's a very, very good movie.
So that is the importance of estate planning.
Right.
Had that old lady had documents in place as to who would be her guardian, the court would never have been in a position to have to appoint a guardian because she made that decision of who should be her guardian in the event of incapacity. All right? Because if you don't make these decisions for yourself, and we'll get to that in a minute, the state has a plan for you, right? If you don't make these decisions, then the state makes one for you, and that's a judge making these decisions. A judge who knows nothing about you, nothing about your circumstances, nothing about your family. All right. So a couple, common misconceptions, right, is that you need to have money to have a plan. That's not true at all. Right? As I just gave you the example of making healthcare decisions for yourself, right? Making financial decisions for yourself, right? Who gets to make sure that your mortgage is paid if you're in the hospital, right? Who's making those decisions for you, right? That's the importance of a financial power of attorney. So an estate plan is not only a will, it's not only a trust, it's all of these other documents that come into effect if you are incapacitated, okay? Now, there's a presumption that your spouse will get everything anyway. The law does not presume that the spouse gets everything. So I have another story for you. There was a lady who, her husband died, and she owned a house. And they had two grown kids. And the husband died, and the husband thought, okay, well, the spouse is going to get everything anyway, so he didn't have a plan. And what happened is that the spouse could no longer pay the mortgage, so she wanted to sell the property. When she went to sell the property, she realized that intestacy laws, intestacy meaning if you died without a will, meant that she gets half and her daughters get a quarter each. So she could not sell the house without the consent of her two daughters.
How old were
So-
her daughters?
Her daughters were grown.
Oh.
One of them was estranged from her
Mm.
and refused to consent. So they ended up spending money going to court for her to have to, get that house sold, right? So when you think, oh, I'm spending money on estate planning now, your family is going to spend it now, or you can either spend it now or your family will spend it later, right? And that's really what it's about, right? So on top of the conflict, of course, that it creates. So that is just another example of when you think that you have to have money. That's not necessarily it, and your spouse gets everything. Another example I want to give you is if I had a situation where a client of mine had just one bank account. She died and she left one bank account with $10,000 in it. It cost the family $3,000 to get access to $10,000. right? And the reason for that is because when you die without having any documents, or you die even with a will, you have to pay an attorney to go to court, to file all of the documents for you, to, go through all of the appraiser's fees and whatever, figure out where the account is first of all, and then that's how the money, there's filing fees, there's all kinds of other fees.
Don't bank accounts have you sign in the event of your death, this person?
Payable on death?
Yeah.
Some of them don't. And some people, in fact, I would say about 75% of people have not designated a payable on death. I didn't when I opened any of my bank accounts. Yeah.
I've never heard of it.
Yep.
Maybe because I'm young.
No, it's just that it's not like you go to the bank and you open the account. Most banks will never tell you, hey, who are you going to make payable on death? Right? That's just an extra step for them that they could avoid, right? So let's talk about that, and I'm happy that you raised that, Tony, because we're going to get to beneficiary designations. A lot of people think, okay, look, you have life insurance here at the company, right? That's a benefit that you get at Hexagon. So let's use that life insurance as an example. So you sign on with Hexagon, you take the life insurance, and you designate your spouse as your beneficiary, right? You have a child, and then you say, okay, well, my child will be the contingent beneficiary, right? So if I die, then my spouse, and if my spouse dies, then it goes to my child, right? I'm giving you that example, right? What happens if you and your wife get into a car accident and pass, and your minor child is now the beneficiary?
Well, doesn't it go to the child, but it weighs still the child's an adult, like 18, so
Correct.
They can get the money?
So we still have to go through a court process.
Right.
Right? So that's why beneficiary designations is not the ideal way of planning, right? So you'll have to go to court, and the court will have to appoint a guardian to look after that asset until the child turns 18. And at the age of 18, the child gets the asset outright. They can do anything they want with it, it's their money. All right? There's no stipulations. Like, let's say you wanted your child to use this money for education. They would have no restrictions on that money. Okay? All right. So, any questions so far? Remember I spoke to you about the state's plan for you? Well, this is what it looks like. It's called probate, right? So what probate is, it's just the court process that you have to go through if you die without a will, and even if you die with a will, right? And this is shocking for a lot of people. A lot of people think that, well, if I have a will, I'm good, right? Everything's set out in the will. But what you have to do is you have to go to the court still, and that court has to approve the will to make sure that it meets the statutory requirements of a valid will, to ensure that your creditors are notified of your death, right? So that if they have a claim against you, they come first and they make a claim, and your estate has to pay out those claims before your beneficiary gets anything. So here's my definition of probate. Probate is a lawsuit that you file against yourself with your own money for the benefit of your creditors, because they get first dibs, right? So this is really kind of like what the probate process looks like, right? You file it in court, it takes time, you hire an attorney, everything is a public record, by the way, so you can go on the court website and you can pull up the will for anyone that you know have passed and they went through probate, and you can see what they left and who they left it for. All right, it's a very public forum. Okay, so this is kind of what it looks like. So that is the state's plan for you. Okay, any questions here? All right, I want to ask you guys a question. Do your loved ones know exactly where your assets are held?
Where their assets are held?
Where your assets are held?
Where
Currently,
mine-
yeah.
Where mine are.
Yeah. So Brandon, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Where does your dad know exactly where your assets are?
No,
He knows which bank you bank with.
probably. Just because we got wire transactions here, but.
Okay.
How about you, Amanda? You know anything
But I
about
mean,
that?
I deal
About
with
yours?
stocks and stuff like that.
And he
too.
knows nothing about that, right?
Nobody does, no.
Okay.
So let me ask you, He is knows there a all way mine. to avoid probate?
We'll talk about that in a minute. But we're gonna get that. I'm just asking you all of this because the first thing that happens when someone dies, when they come to my office, I say, well, where are their assets? And then I get deer in headlights, right? They look at me like, I don't know, don't you find this out? No, I can't find this out. So then we have to go start fishing around to see, writing letters to banks and see where assets are being held, right? Back in the day when we got snail mail, we would wait by the mailbox, right? And we'll get all the mail that comes in for the deceased and we'll go through it and then we'll know, okay, because they got bank statements, right? Does anybody get a bank statement here? I don't. No, everything's electronic now, right? So now it's near impossible for your loved ones to find it. So when an asset is not found and is not claimed by an heir, right? Or someone who is an heir, meaning you're someone who's entitled to receive that asset, right? What happens to that asset? Anybody knows?
Goes to the state, doesn't it?
Correct. So it goes to what we call the Texas Department of Unclaimed Property. Can somebody guess what is the value of assets currently in the Texas Department of Unclaimed Property?
Billions?
67 billion.
$4 billion.
I was gonna say
$4 billion currently in the Texas Department of Unclaimed Property. That's just Texas. In the United States, it's approximately $58 billion.
Oh, wow.
Right? But it's very easy, right, to see how something can get lost there, right?
Mm-hmm.
I remember I had a Wells Fargo account with like $500 in it, but nobody knew, and I even forgot about it, right? And I can't remember what happened. I remembered, oh, I had this $500 in that account, but if I died, no one would ever find that account. But that is $500, yes, but it's $500 of my money that I want my loved ones to get. Right? That could have paid some bill, could have contributed something to my funeral, whatever it is, right? And I didn't want that to get lost. So that's the issue that I have with will-based planning, right? And probate, right? These things, it's very easy to get lost. Now, there's a better way of planning, and that's called a revocable or living trust, right? So think of that red bucket there as your trust, and you take all of your assets and you put it in there. So the first thing that we've accomplished is that all of your assets, we know where they are. Nothing gets lost. The second thing is that we actually avoid probates. We don't have to go through probate at all. You go to your attorney's office, you sign some documents to get for your successor trustee to be appointed, and they take over management of your trust. Okay? You can also build in protection for your children in a trust. So let's say you had $1 million policy, life insurance policy that you left for a child that you may not want them to get at the age of 18 or maybe even at the age of 25, right? You can actually determine how that child is to use that money. So it gives you full control of the assets you leave behind, even from the grave, right? To ensure that your values are passed on to your children, right? That they have security, but they don't have entitlement. Right? And for me, that was a big thing, of planning for my own children, right? Making sure that they would never need, but that they would go out there and become contributing members of our society, right? A trust also provides for your incapacity. So there are stipulations within your trust that determines what happens to you. What do you want to happen to you in the event of your incapacity? Okay? So that is, any questions on a trust? And it's just an agreement, by the way. It's a written agreement.
When it says it protects your assets from your creditors, how does it do that?
So, if you leave your assets, let's talk about that $1 million policy that you left for your child. You can leave that in what we call a lifetime asset protection trust that will protect that asset from possible future divorce if your child were to get divorced. You can protect it from their creditors. You can protect it from lawsuits, right? And we all know we live in Texas, how easy it is to get sued, right? You get into a fender bender, and then all of a sudden you have a lawsuit on your hands, right? So that's what it's there to do. You can build all of that protection within a trust, questions?
Can you put company assets in there?
Absolutely. So what you do is you designate your share in LLC or corporation into the name of your trust. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about estate planning attorneys. Most estate planning attorneys, or what we call do-it-yourself plans, you know, LegalZoom. Heard of LegalZoom? You go online and do an online will.
Oh, yeah. I heard that.
Yeah. Okay, so that's great. At least it's getting something in place. But your money will still go through probate. You will get no protection for your kids, and you would not get the legal advice that you need, right? So my advice is always, when you're looking at legal documents, you want to work with an attorney who's going to sit with you, go through your particular circumstances, because everybody's circumstances, even in this room, is different, right? My plan is going to be look different from George's plan, right? Not every plan is going to look the same. So you want to make sure that you work with someone who's going to sit with you and go through all of these things in detail with you and come up with a plan that suits your budget, because that's also a factor, right? And suits your circumstances, okay? A couple of ways that I do things differently is I don't charge an hourly rate. I charge a flat fee for everything. It's agreed to in advance, so there's no surprises. And the reason I do that is because I want my clients to pick up the phone and call me and say, hey Shalini, so-and-so happened, what do I do, right? And I like to build that relationship with my clients, okay? And I don't want them to have to think that every time they pick up the phone or send me an email, they're gonna get a bill, right?
And that's why a lot of people avoid lawyers, because you feel like, how much is this gonna cost me every time you have a question? Or
Exactly. And I've done that, right? I've worked in firms, I've been doing this 15 years, where I've had to bill for my time. And I have clients who literally are running me off the phone while I am trying to get information from them, because they know that I have to bill for my time.
Divorce attorneys.
Yeah. Exactly. So when I started my own firm, I knew that I wanted to do things differently, and that's why I'm a relationship-based firm.
That's the same way with our company.
Yes. So I pick up the phone, I talk to my clients, I do a free review of their plan every 3 years. So once you work with me, every 3 years, you're going to come in, we're going to sit down and review your plan. Because guess what? The laws change.
Right.
People's circumstances change. You may have a baby in that time and then say, oh Shalini, we have to revise this because, I have changes in my own plan. I also do a video interview. So while I'm being recorded here, I think that estate planning is more than just leaving your assets. It's about leaving your legacy, your little mark on this world. So I do a video interview with you so that you can pass on your stories, your insights, your experiences to your loved ones. Because more than the money that you leave behind, what they really want to hear is your voice, and they want to see your face. So as part of your plan, you do a video interview with me. Okay? Any questions? One more thing.
I do have a question. So after you do somebody's estate planning,
Yes?
where is it? Is it filed with the state or?
No.
No?
No. It's
If
private.
I were to pass away and Amanda didn't know to contact you,
Oh, she gets a letter from me if she's named in your plan in any capacity. So let's say you did a trust, Aunt Tony, and you've named her as a successor trustee, for instance. She would get a letter from me at the end of our process when we finish designing the plan, saying that she's been appointed in a potential role with her giving her all of my contact information if something should happen. I have copies of everything, and then you have the originals in a binder that I give to you. But I retain copies of it, and I also give you a USB with all of your documents on it.
because I know a lot of instances, like my dad's up in his age, well, we already know once he passes that we won't have access to his house. So who would have access to any documentation?
Yeah, so his attorney should have everything. I keep copies of all of my clients' documents, and I give them the originals.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and I send the fiduciary letters for them saying that you've been appointed as a role. If something should happen to Tony, please contact my office. right? As I said before, it's a relationship. I don't do a plan for my clients and send them on their way. My clients are my clients for life. And I do want to talk to you guys about minor kids a little bit, right? So there's something that I do call a kids protection plan, right? I know that you have 2 of you guys who are married, so I want to talk to you a little bit about that. When you have kids, I gave you my first story of why I started in estate planning. You want to make sure that you appoint long-term and short-term guardians for your children, right? Short-term guardians. Short-term guardians are the people who can get to your children within 20 minutes of something happening to you, right? You do not want CPS to be involved. You do not want your children to be taken into foster care, whether temporarily or even permanently. You want your children to be with the people that they know, love, and trust. So you want to appoint short-term guardians saying, if something should happen to me, you list these people out. These are the people that should be contacted. People that you know can get to your children within 20 minutes. You also want to appoint a long-term guardian. Who do you want to take long-term care of your child, right? And this is not the person in your family who has the most money, right? Which is often the person that we choose, right? This is the person who shares your values, right? Because leaving money for your children is your responsibility, right? And yes, while you're young and accumulating wealth and all of that stuff, that money may come in the way of life insurance. All right, it may not necessarily mean money that you actually have on hand. All right, that's why life insurance is super important.
And
Okay.
it's cheap when you're young.
Oh, yeah, I got
Exactly.
it. Yeah, I got it.
And even if you take out some term insurance, right? Right? It gives you some time to create wealth in that space of time, but it's cheap term insurance for 20, 30 years, right? That can cover you. Okay? So the financial responsibility for your kids is yours, but you want to appoint someone who's going to raise your children with the same values as you would have. Same religious values, spiritual values, in the community that you would want. Okay? And when I do a kids protection plan, I also do ID cards for my clients. And ID cards they keep in their wallets and in their cars. In the event they're involved in a car accident or something happens, the authorities know to call those people on that list, right?
Do those people get a letter same way as the?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And similarly for pets, right? You may have a pet that really is like a child to you, right? If you're involved in a car accident, who's gonna feed your dog?
Right.
Who's gonna know that you have a dog at home that needs to be fed, right? So you wanna make sure that you take care of your pets and you take care of your kids, okay? So my ID card says, I have minor kids at school or at home, please contact these people. All right? So, what's the first step that you have to take? You have to book a family wealth planning session. That is a 2-hour meeting with me that I will go over all of your assets, all of your circumstances with you, and develop a plan. And your plan may be very basic. It may be a basic will with some basic powers of attorneys and medical documents, right? That's what I call a basic plan. And that's a plan that anyone over the age of 18 should have, right? And because of George, you guys are getting that for free. All right, so that 2-hour meeting with me is of no cost to you, and you have no obligation to do any planning with me. But it's a great informational 2 hours with me. The only requirement is that you do have to do some homework before your meeting. That's the only way that I can advise you, right? If you do your homework, I need to know what your family dynamic is like, right? If you're in a blended family, I'm in a blended family. I need to know what your assets look like, right? Because I need to advise you from a tax perspective as well, right? So the only requirement is that you do some homework and you get that meeting with me for free.
Thank you, George. Like if we do that meeting, could our spouse be there as well?
Absolutely, your spouse has to be there if you're married. It's a requirement, all right? But that's just, and then we figure out something that works for you with your budget. But as I said, if you decided, look, Shalini, I don't want to do any planning, that's fine, okay? There's no obligation to do any planning. But it's just a really good session for you to at least get your mind wrapped around what is important and what you should have in place. Okay? Any questions? No? Nothing?
You got a business card?
I do.
Yeah, that's all.
I
That's-
do. Alright. Well, that's
So
all
yeah,
I
guys,
have.
the reason, I mean, one, like 32 years old, unexpected, had young children. When that happened, thinking about what his family was going through, that's why I asked Shalini to come in here and speak to you guys. Because, you know, the two of you are married, but you don't have any kids now, but who's to say 6 months from now
Right.
or something, you know, it may happen. Just wanna make sure that your things are taken care of. It was also an eye-opener for me, I don't have nothing taken care of, which I should have.
Yep.
And to further George's point, when I spoke to his wife last week, they're still waiting for the death certificate, so they don't have access to anything until that death certificate's issued.
And you gotta get copies of that too, I think, to give out to married people, right?
It's a long,
To be honest
long
with you,
process.
my mom passed away earlier this year, and partially it's because, I mean, I haven't, you still got a bank account that we haven't done anything with.
It's hard when you're dealing with grief to also have to deal with that aspect of it.
Legalities.
Yes, exactly. By the way, I think is the plumber who came to my house.
Yes, he was.
And I think it was a week before he passed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he was really sweet, and I remember saying, oh, how sweet, and I called George to tell him how nice he was, and I was really impressed with him. So, I know that, you know, it's hard, but we just try to make it a little bit easier. So if you guys have any questions, just let me know.
Years of life, here's my $4,000.
No problem.